In the summer of 1972, at a farmhouse called Dummer Down in Hampshire, a mother packed a suitcase for Argentina. Her name was Susan Ferguson. She was leaving her husband, Major Ronald Ferguson, a cavalry officer who had commanded the sovereign's escort at Trooping the Color and now managed polo for Prince Charles for another polo player, an Argentine named Héctor Barrantes. She was also leaving two daughters. The elder, Jane, was mid-teen, turning 15 that August. The younger was Sarah, 12 years old in October, already enrolled at a Hampshire preparatory school called Daneshill that happened to be closing that same autumn. Argentina is 7,000 miles from Hampshire. El Pucará, the ranch where Susan and Héctor would settle, sat 335 miles southwest of Buenos Aires, a 6-hour drive from the nearest city, in the rural corridor of Buenos Aires province near a town called Guaminí. In 1972, with no internet and no affordable telephone line to the Argentine pampas, that distance wasn't inconvenient, it was operational absence. The available record suggests Sarah and her mother didn't see each other in person again until the summer of 1976, 4 years later. In a 2022 interview, decades after writing 2 memoirs and giving hundreds of television appearances, Sarah said this: at the age of 12, she had told herself her mother had left because she had cut her hair. That specific detail, a 12-year-old's attempt to locate herself at the center of a departure that was about everything except her, is the most precise window the public record gives us into what happened inside Dummer Down Farm that summer. The 4 subsequent decades begin in that sentence, not in any scandal file. 26 years later, on the 19th of September 1998, 1 year and 19 days after Diana died in the Paris tunnel, Susan Barrantes was killed when her Rover 400 collided head-on with a truck on a rural road near Tres Lomas, Buenos Aires province. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt. She was 61 years old. She was buried in the vault beneath the house at El Pucará, beside the polo field, beside Héctor, who had died there 8 years earlier. The mother had now left twice. The first time was a choice. The second time, whatever repair was still possible, died on that road. Between those 2 departures, the daughter married a prince, was discarded by the institution that married her, and chased rescue across 4 decades with what her own second memoir, in 2011, described as the trail of debts and chaos that I have left behind me. One of the most watched documentary films about her royal story called her a motherless girl from a horsey Hampshire family who was never supposed to matter, and then never told the mother's story. Every documentary in the market is a scandal inventory. None of them is the origin film. This is the prequel they didn't make. The world that produced Sarah Ferguson is worth understanding precisely because its specific character shaped what motherless would mean in practice. Dummer Down Farm occupies 480 acres in Dummer, a village near Basingstoke in North Hampshire, about a mile outside the village proper. Ronald Ferguson had grown up there. It was his family's home before it was his. The farmhouse is red brick, substantial, the kind of property that photographs well without being grand. Sarah describes moving there around the age of 8, just in time for it to become the fixed point of her childhood before the fixed point was removed. The polo connection wasn't incidental. It was structural. Ronald had managed polo first for Prince Philip, then for Prince Charles, a role he held for approximately 21 years. The Guards Polo Club at Smith's Lawn, Windsor, was a few miles distant. Sarah, writing in her 1996 memoir, described growing up in that proximity clearly. As a result, Jane and I had frequent opportunities to practice our curtsies before the royal family. They weren't some remote abstraction. We considered them friends of our parents. The royal family wasn't a destination for this child. It was the landscape. Susan Wright had entered that landscape through a socially matched marriage on the 17th of January, 1956. The wedding was at St. Margaret's, Westminster, the society church beside the abbey, with approximately 600 guests and a reception at Claridge's. Susan's background combined industrial wealth, landed connection, and hussar officers. Her father was an army officer of the 15th, 19th Hussars, her mother a Wingfield, connected to Viscount Powerscourt. She was a debutante, presented at court. She and Ronald shared horses, polo, and the minor gentry's world that orbited the royal polo circuit. In later accounts, Ronald described Susan as having a touch of Irish wildness. He called her, posthumously, the most incredibly loyal wife. The marriage deteriorated. Susan suffered the loss of a baby in circumstances involving a serious pregnancy complication. Ronald later admitted to the occasional indiscretion, 2 brief affairs in 16 years. Susan accused him of womanizing. She fell in love with Héctor Barrantes. She left. The divorce was finalized in May 1974. She married Héctor the following year. None of that is a villain's story. It's the common enough story of a miserable marriage, a new love, and a departure that turned out to have consequences nobody fully calculated at the time. Ronald raised Jane and Sarah at Dummer Down farm with extended family, then with his second wife, Susan Detford, whom he married in 1975 or 1976, and with whom he had 3 more children. The household continued to function. The horses continued. The polo continued. Ronald continued managing the palace polo calendar. There was no financial collapse, no dramatic rupture to the surface of daily life at Dummer Down. The wound wasn't a collapse. It was an absence. A center removed while everything around it kept operating exactly as before, which is its own kind of instruction. In a world where pragmatism was the social contract, grief was managed rather than processed. Ronald Ferguson was a man who called palace courtiers toadies, who titled his memoir The Galloping Major, who commanded cavalry escorts and expressed emotion primarily as outrage. He offered continuity. Continuity isn't nothing, but it isn't the same as being caught. Héctor Eduardo Barrantes Sansoni was born on the 9th of March, 1939, in Trenque Lauquen, Buenos Aires province. He was a professional polo player, by the standards of Argentine polo, sufficiently prominent to attract sustained attention from the British circuit and eventually from Ronald Ferguson's wife. He was also, in February 1972, the same year Susan fell in love with him, a widower. His wife and their unborn child had been killed in a car crash near Buenos Aires that winter. No source draws a causal line from that tragedy to the romance that followed. But it is worth knowing. 2 people, each carrying a specific kind of loss, finding each other in the same year. El Pucará was the ranch they built together. 1,000 acres of the Buenos Aires pampa, a 6-hour drive from the city, named after Héctor's father's ranch in the province of Salta. They bred polo ponies and cattle there. Susan developed a career as a documentary producer focused on horses. She co-wrote a book on polo for which Prince Charles supplied a foreword, addressing them in it as Susie and Héctor. This was the life Sarah's later memoir described in almost warm terms. Everybody adored Héctor, and as I got to know him, so did I. The record of Susan's Argentine years isn't a record of punishment. She was, by most accounts, happy. The distance was still 7,000 miles. Letters took weeks. Phone calls to rural Buenos Aires province in the 1970s required advance booking and luck. Sarah and Jane remained in England with Ronald. The first documented in-person reunion between Sarah and her mother after the summer of 1972 appears to have occurred in 1976, the summer Sarah turned 16. 4 years of physical absence during the years when a person learns whether the people they attach to stay. Jane Ferguson navigated the same departure from the same farmhouse at roughly the same age. In her 2011 memoir, Finding Sarah, Sarah described her sister in a sentence that reveals more than it probably intended. Jane would further flee to marry a fellow named Alex Makem and live on his sheep ranch in Australia. That word, flee, is Sarah's own. Jane married an Australian and settled in Australia, another hemisphere, mirroring her mother's geographic escape in direction, if not in damage. She has no documented record of large-scale debt, commercial collapse, or cash-for-access scandal. The same wound didn't determine both daughters identically, but Jane was 2 years older at the departure, already closer to leaving home herself, and she ultimately did leave, horizontally, for Australia, rather than in the circular pattern that organized her sister's life. The wound interacted with a specific person, in specific circumstances, in a specific sequence. What came after for Sarah wasn't written in 1972, but it started there. In June 1985, Princess Diana arranged a royal Ascot lunch and seated Sarah Ferguson next to Prince Andrew. Multiple biographies confirm Diana's role in the arrangement. The meeting took. By the 19th of March, 1986, an engagement was announced. The wedding was on the 23rd of July, 1986, at Westminster Abbey. Susan and Hector attended from Argentina. Ronald Ferguson stood in the aisle as father of the bride. The girl from the Polo farmhouse in Hampshire had married the second son of the Queen. The documentary that described her as a motherless girl from a horsey Hampshire family who was never supposed to matter frames what followed with a phrase that carries structural precision. Pulled into the institution almost by accident, and within 18 months, the institution had no use for what she was. That framing is accurate. What it doesn't pursue is why the withdrawal felt so familiar. The early signals were press coverage, not palace statements. British press coverage of a 1988 California royal tour was sharply critical, describing the tour in terms of vulgarity and excess. The tabloids, who had initially adored her, she was fun, she was red-haired, she seemed refreshingly unlike Diana, started to turn. By 1988, she was Fat Fergie and the Duchess of Pork. The tabloids mocked her weight through both pregnancies. Princess Beatrice, born in August 1988, Princess Eugenie by cesarean in March 1990. Sarah wrote in her own account that the coverage damaged her self-esteem and worsened her eating disorder. The eating disorder she traced, in that same memoir, to the age of 12, to the year her mother left. Ronald Ferguson's own downfall arrived in 1988, the same year that California coverage turned. The News of the World exposed his membership at the Wigmore Club, a West End establishment alleged to offer sexual services. He admitted attending, lost his vice chairmanship at the Guards Polo Club, and was dropped as Charles's polo manager, the post that had been the family's connective tissue to the palace world for 2 decades. The Ferguson name, which had been an asset, became a liability. By 1991, Andrew's naval duties had reduced the couple to, by Sarah's own account, as few as 40 days together in a year. She had found the institution isolating. The formal separation was announced in March 1992. What followed was August. The 20th of August, 1992, the Daily Mirror published photographs taken covertly while Sarah was on holiday in Saint-Tropez. Her companion, John Bryan, an American she described in her memoir as someone who started out as my financial advisor, then became something. And then, in the next lines, describing the moment the call came. On Tuesday, I took the first of many calls from John Bryan. I'm afraid they've got... The sentence breaks off in the available excerpt. The images went worldwide by morning. They showed Bryan kissing and sucking Sarah's toes as her daughters, Beatrice, 3, Eugenie, 2, sat nearby in the photographs. Buckingham Palace announced that Sarah would no longer carry out official engagements on behalf of the Queen. The palace also confirmed that the Queen wouldn't assume responsibility for Sarah's debts. The institution had ceased defending her. The abandonment in 1972 had been personal. The abandonment in 1992 was institutional. The structure was the same. She had been inside something, attached to something, and then, with a clinical specificity, the use of her had been withdrawn. She described it herself in a 1993 television interview as grippingly sad, because it's just unfortunate circumstances which has caused it to get this far. The people she attached to left, or they revealed they'd never quite committed to staying. Here is where the anger in the public record has to be addressed directly, because it's legitimate and it does not dissolve by being explained. The fury at Sarah Ferguson is real, and it's earned. She ran up debts that by April 1994 included an overdue Coutts Bank demand for £500,000, reportedly cleared by the Queen. By November 1995, by her own later admission, she needed bank pre-approval for routine checks. By the 1996 divorce, she had accumulated a Coutts overdraft of approximately £4.2 million. The divorce settlement, £15,000 a year, less than a naval officer's salary, was deliberately modest, apparently to preserve her standing with the household. The modest public figure became an argument for sympathy. The £4.2 million bank deficit didn't. Her answer was the United States. On the 15th of January 1997, at a press conference in Manhattan, she announced a one-year contract as U.S. spokeswoman for Weight Watchers International at a salary reported at approximately $1 million annually. The UPI wire confirmed the deal on that date. Sarah acknowledged explicitly it would help pay off a multi-million-dollar debt. The campaign launched the week Diana died. 2 million direct mail brochures had already been mailed nationally, featuring Sarah saying that losing weight was harder than outrunning the paparazzi. Those brochures arrived in American mailboxes in the days after the Paris tunnel. Weight Watchers pulled the television launch. The brochures were already out. She stayed with Weight Watchers through approximately 2007. She worked the Washington Speakers Bureau at a reported fee of around $55,000 per appearance. She represented Waterford Wedgwood for a reported one-year contract worth £500,000. She wrote children's books. She appeared on NBC's Today. She founded a lifestyle and wellness company called Heartmore LLC in New York in 2006. By any measure of activity, she was working harder than most people watching her, building and maintaining commercial relationships across 2 continents. Andrew Lowney's biography of the Yorks places her personal expenditure at approximately £860,000 per year in the early 1990s. That figure explains the arithmetic. No spokesperson deal, however substantial, could outrun a spending structure built in a period when money had seemed essentially unlimited. Every commercial deal was rescue. Every appearance was a new calculation about which portion of the debt could be serviced this quarter. The people who watch this and feel fury, who work modest jobs, pay their bills, and find the spectacle of serial bailouts genuinely offensive, aren't wrong. They are identifying something real, a pattern in which consequences were repeatedly deferred because the person experiencing them had access, through birth and marriage, to rescue infrastructure unavailable to anyone who hadn't married into a palace. That is a legitimate grievance, worth naming. What the wound explains isn't the scale of the spending, it's the mechanism of the rescue seeking, the particular logic by which money became a proxy for affection, and affection was a proxy for permanence, and both were substitutes for the thing that hadn't come back since 1972. John Bryan traveled with Sarah and a detective to Argentina after Héctor Barrantes died, finding Susan's ranch with utilities cut off and substantial unpaid bills. Bryan reportedly called what he found there the family disease. The daughter in financial crisis, The mother she traveled to support also in financial crisis. The same structure, in 2 generations, in 2 hemispheres. Héctor Barrantes died on the 10th of August, 1990, at age 51, of cancer of the lymph glands at El Pucará. Sarah, 8 months pregnant with Eugenie, reportedly traveled to New York to be with him when he was treated there. She had come to love him. His death left Susan with the ranch, debts related to polo operations and horses, and the practical solitude of 335 miles from Buenos Aires in rural Buenos Aires province. She sold a substantial portion of El Pucará, including acreage to Australian media magnate Kerry Packer. She rebuilt a life as a documentary producer. She was, by most accounts, managing. Susan Barrantes died on the 19th of September, 1998. The road near Tres Lomas. A head-on collision with a truck. Not wearing a seatbelt. 61 years old. She was buried at El Pucará, beside the polo field, beside Héctor. The interval between Diana's death and Susan's was 1 year and 19 days. 2 losses compressed into 13 months. Sarah had lost her former sister-in-law and closest ally in the palace world on the 31st of August, 1997. Her mother followed on that September road a year later. She was 38 years old. Whatever conversation had not yet occurred between mother and daughter, whatever accounting, whatever repair, whatever full reckoning with 1972, died on that road before it could be had. Sarah later paid tribute publicly on the anniversaries of her mother's death. Today I celebrate the legacy of the 2 women who gave me so much strength and courage. The language is careful, curated, the tribute of a woman who had processed the wound across 2 memoirs, 1 television series, and a reported letter of forgiveness to Susan. But the public tribute isn't the private one, and the private one died with Susan. Whatever the repair would have looked like, it remained hypothetical after September 1998. The structure of the next decade becomes traceable from here. Heartmore LLC, the lifestyle and wellness company Sarah founded in New York in 2006, collapsed in 2009, leaving debts of approximately £630,000. Legal actions followed from creditors, including unpaid lawyers and accountants. Reports of unpaid bills included a Selfridges account of roughly £51,000. The Weight Watchers deal had ended in 2007. The income structure that had serviced the debt had stopped. By 2009, according to emails released by the U.S. Department of Justice in 2026, Sarah Ferguson had written to Jeffrey Epstein, then serving his sentence in Palm Beach County Jail for soliciting prostitution from a minor, asking his advice on how to handle approximately £6 million in debt. She called Epstein a true friend. Epstein, in his reply, told her to get it in writing. The deal was never signed. That exchange took place in the months before the sting. The emails, as reported by the BBC in 2026, show Epstein and a London-based intermediary named David Stern discussing Sarah's financial situation in remarkably disrespectful tones. By October 2009, Stern was apparently reporting to Epstein on a meeting with her. She made statements such as, "I surrender. I am ready to die. Death is easier than this." By the following months, she was reportedly exploring investment proposals from a Russian businessman, someone she could reportedly not recall by surname. The creditors were accumulating. The structure was failing. The visible pattern was familiar. Anyone with the means to absorb the weight became a candidate for rescue. The man who arrived in that position was Mazhar Mahmood, a longtime News of the World reporter who spent a decade posing as a wealthy Middle Eastern businessman, the fake sheikh, to entrap public figures. In May 2010, he met Sarah Ferguson at a luxury apartment in Mayfair, London. The meeting was filmed. On the footage, Ferguson offers access to Prince Andrew in exchange for £500,000. The verified wording, reproduced across multiple contemporaneous sources. £500,000 when you can, to me, open doors. And elsewhere on the recording, I can open any door you want. The footage was broadcast on the 23rd of May, 2010. Sarah issued a public statement calling it a serious lapse in judgment and confirmed that Andrew knew nothing about it. The following month, on The Oprah Winfrey Show, she called her behavior stupid and out of control. Buckingham Palace stated that Andrew had carried out his duties with complete and absolute propriety and integrity. He wasn't implicated. Sarah's acceptance of a 5-figure cash advance, the exact amount varying across sources, was documented on video. The £500,000 total was the number she had named. What transferred hands on that day was considerably less. Mazhar Mahmood was jailed in 2016, not for the Ferguson operation. He was convicted of perverting the course of justice in an entirely separate sting involving the singer Tulisa Kontostavlos. There are no documented criminal consequences for the Ferguson operation specifically. Sarah Ferguson filed a High Court claim against News UK in 2016, seeking £25 million in damages on the grounds that the sting had destroyed her reputation and future earnings. In 2011, she publicly admitted to having accepted £15,000 from Jeffrey Epstein in 2010, paid, she said, to cover wages owed to a former personal assistant. She called it a gigantic error of judgment and stated that she would have nothing ever to do with Jeffrey Epstein ever again. The DOJ files released in 2026 indicate the financial relationship extended further than that single payment. Those same files contain emails in which she called Epstein a supreme friend. A spokesman explained the language was produced under what she described as a threat of defamation action. By the spring of 2026, at least 6 charities had dropped her as patron or ambassador. Her charity, Sarah's Trust, announced it was closing. The record does not leave you with one thing to hold. It leaves you with 2, and they don't cancel. There is the file, the documented debts, the commercial collapses, the sting footage, the payments to a convicted pedophile, the 40-year chase for rescue. The documentary that called her brash, brazen, and buried in debt was right. The file is real. It's long. It belongs to no one but her. She authored every item in it. There is also the wound. A 12-year-old at a farmhouse in Hampshire in the summer of 1972, whose mother packed for Argentina, whose father managed polo, whose world continued exactly as before, except for the one thing at the center that didn't. A wound sustained before any palace, before any Andrew, before any debt. A wound that wrote the same sentence into the pattern of behavior that followed for 40 years. The people you attach to, leave. Secure something fast before it goes. When the security fails, find another. And when no one is offering it willingly, accept it from whoever is in the room. That explanation isn't an acquittal. The 67 likes commenter who watches someone endlessly rescued and feels that as an insult to every person who pays their debts quietly and without recourse, that anger is aimed at something real, and it should stay aimed. The explanation is what makes the anger make sense, not what makes it go away. Jane Ferguson married Alex Mackham and moved to Australia, a sheep station on another continent. She has flown from Australia to be with Sarah through crises, the 2025 Epstein fallout, smaller emergencies, the ordinary maintenance of a sisterhood sustained across hemispheres. She attends Crufts. She posts National Siblings Day tributes. Sarah writes back, "There is nobody like my Jane. She is a dream of a sibling. My sister makes my world so bright." The same wound, the elder daughter, a different life. Jane's trajectory doesn't prove the wound wasn't there. It shows the wound interacted with a specific person, with Sarah's particular temperament, with the specific second abandonment the palace delivered in 1992, with the specific financial structure of royal divorce in 1996, with the specific removal of all hope for repair in September 1998. Beatrice and Eugenie grew up inside the pattern. They have defended their mother publicly, attended to her during crises, been photographed beside her through scandals that reflected on them directly by association. Beatrice was born in August 1988, the year the tabloids started turning. Eugenie arrived by cesarean in March 1990, the year Héctor Barrantes died and the financial problems at El Pucará first surfaced. Two daughters who have spent their adulthoods doing what daughters of a complicated mother do. They show up. The generational echo isn't metaphorical, it's structural. Daughters paying for a mother's departure is the Ferguson family's repeating unit. Susan left in 1972. The daughter spent 4 decades chasing rescue. The granddaughters have spent their adulthoods managing the aftermath. The question the 6 Likes commenter asked, why do the daughters keep helping their mother, is answered by looking at the structure, not the sentiment. Because that is what daughters do when the mother is in trouble and there is no one else. Because they didn't have a model in this family for anything else. In 1972, a mother drove away from a farmhouse in Hampshire, and a 12-year-old girl learned the lesson that organized the rest of her life. The people you attach to leave. By August 1992, the institution had delivered the same lesson on a larger stage. By September 1998, the last chance for the original lesson to be revised disappeared on a road near Tres Lomas, in a Rover 400, without a seatbelt. By May 2010, the pattern had taken her as far as a Mayfair apartment and a man who monetized other people's desperation for a living. You can hold the file in one hand and the wound in the other. The evidence never made them cancel out. That was always the point. Sarah Ferguson didn't start running in 1992. She started running in 1972, and no one has ever caught her. If stories like this are what you come here for, origin films, not just scandal inventories, subscribe. There are more.